Well, it's a pleasure to welcome everybody to a special online edition of Beyond the Headlines here at the Pardee School of Global Studies at Boston University. Our topic today is how to rebuild America's international image in a changing world. But obviously with that topic, it presupposes an awful lot. That the image does need to change, and if it's going to change to what? But we're going to have a great discussion today because we have three brilliant experts to help us go through here. First, I want to introduce Ambassador Lauren Moriarty, a trustee at the Asia Foundation. I could go through her great career. She may do that, but it is extremely distinguished. And right now she is coming to us from Hawaii. We have Ambassador Mark Storella. He's our very own at the Pardee School, welcoming Mark as a new professor of the practice with a distinguished career at the State Department. And also we have Professor Jeff Taliaferro at Tufts University, who is a wealth of knowledge in this area. So I want to first turn it over to Ambassador Moriarty to give some opening comments and her perspective. Lauren, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jack, and aloha, everyone. It's a beautiful day here in Hawaii, and I'm thinking of you in the snow, those of you who are in Boston. I'd like to start with a story about the image of the United States in one country where my husband Jim and I lived, Bangladesh. My husband Jim was also a career Foreign Service officer. Bangladesh has a population of about 160 million people, almost half the population of the United States, and they're crammed into a low-lying area about the size of the state of Iowa. In 1991, Cyclone Marion struck Bangladesh and killed more than 138,000 Bangladeshis. The United States immediately diverted the US Marine Expeditionary Force that was on its way home from the Persian Gulf to mount a relief and recovery mission in Bangladesh. That mission was called Operation Sea Angel, and it saved tens of thousands of Bangladeshis. 16 years and many storms later, Cyclone Sidr slammed into Bangladesh and killed 3,400 people. The US military mounted Operation Sea Angel 2. And more recently, US retailers, including Walmart, Target, Gap, and others, worked together as the Alliance for Bangladesh Worker Safety. Between 2013 and 2018, the Alliance spent scores of millions of dollars in a private sector initiative that improved worker safety in Bangladesh's ready-made garment industry. That's the sector that drives Bangladesh's economy, and the industry supplies about supplies the second largest supplier of ready-made garments in the world. So my husband, Jim, as I said, was a career diplomat, and he arrived in Bangladesh as the new US ambassador in 2008, just months after Cyclone Sidr had struck. Jim had gone down to southern Bangladesh to assess the situation. We were just getting out of the car when a young man dressed in a traditional white kurta pushed forward towards Jim, calling out to him in English, "Sir, are you an American?" Jim's bodyguard and his 6-man security detail immediately were on high alert. They circled around us protectively and raised their automatic weapons. Not long before, radical Islamic terrorists had set off 500 bombs around the country, attempted to assassinate the prime minister, and threatened to kill the US ambassador to Bangladesh. Jim turned to the young man and said, "Yes, I'm an American." Ignoring the guns and looking straight at Jim, the young man said, "Sir, I want to thank you. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the Americans. The US military saved my mother during Operation Sea Angel." Now, that young man had a strong and positive image of the United States. And in fact, Bangladeshis in general have a very favorable view of the United States. Pew Research Center 2014 study of 44 nations put Bangladesh among the top 10 fans of the United States, with 76% of Bangladeshis having a favorable view of the United States and only 22% having an unfavorable view. And still today, the United States is viewed very favorably in Bangladesh. So why is that? What does it take to build a positive image? Let me suggest 4 elements just to get our conversation rolling today. First, the reality behind the image matters. Bangladesh and many other countries want to work with the United States. We have a democratic system that survived even a civil war, the world's most powerful military, and a strong, innovative economy. People believe that the United States can be a force for good in the world. They believe we can, doesn't always mean that we are, but people believe that we can be. They and we know that we're not perfect, but the United States has many strengths. Second, words and actions matter. The United States says that human rights are universal values, that all people are created equal regardless of race, color, religion, or creed. We show that we mean what we say when we help poor Muslims in faraway Bangladesh, or we stand up for Uyghurs in Xinjiang. We show by our actions that we mean what we say. Third, consistency matters. When Bangladesh needed us, we were there to help, not once, but through the years. And fourth, what each of us does matters. What our soldiers and our diplomats do, our trade rules and handling of refugees, the actions of private companies and private individuals, how each of us, how each of you talks about the United States and treats foreigners. What all of us say and do contributes to the image of other nations, that other nations and other people have of the United States. I look forward to hearing from the rest of you and hearing your questions. Thanks for the marvels of the virtual miracle that we are able to be together this morning.
Lauren, thank you very much. Those are some really great opening comments. And I want to talk a little bit about my time in Vietnam, but I don't want to take away now from Mark Storella. So Mark, over to you.
Well, Jack, thank you very much. And Lauren, you've really put a lot on the table for all of us to think about and respond to. So thank you for that. I want to say that to the folks who are watching right now, many of you probably have not had the incredible honor of representing the United States around the world. If you ever do have that experience, what Lauren described, having people around the world react in a positive way, sometimes in places where you'd never expect it, frankly, we all experience that. I remember being with the King and the Queen of Belgium at their palace, where they invited all of the people who were veterans left over, still alive, from the Battle of the Bulge, to the palace to have tea with them and their children. I was very moved, and I was the chargé at the time, and on the way out, I said to His Majesty the King, I just want to thank you. We know what you did was extraordinary for our veterans. And he said, my wife and I just wanted our children to see the people and meet the people who liberated their country. That's the way the United States has been perceived over the years. I want to say that our topic today suggests that the United States has to rebuild its image and that the world is changing. I think we really have to adjust our thinking about that a little bit. Our image is constantly evolving, actually. There's certain elements of it that are fairly constant in the world, but the world is also evolving very rapidly in ways that affect the way the United States will be perceived. So let me say that I think Lauren has really set the tone about showing how the United States has been identified over the years, and certainly since World War II, as bringing together in a very special way a combination of both power, the ability to do things, and principle, doing things that matter and that people care about. I want to make very clear, having worked in 5 different continents on behalf of the United States, folks are aware of our errors. Folks know about slavery. People know about Jim Crow. People know about what happened in the Vietnam War. They know how we prosecuted the global war on terror. But there is a desire in the world for leadership from a country that can be trusted. And when we think about how we're going to evolve, how our image is going to evolve, a big question really is the rest of the world prepared to trust the United States as it has in the past? And then is the United States capable and actually willing to take on that mantle? That is really an open question. But the world has changed. And it's changed, I think, in two really big ways. One of them is that the United States now is facing peer competitors of a type it has never faced before, and a diffusion of power that has not been the case during the life of America's most intense involvement in the world. China is the big story of this century, and China is a very different peer competitor from the Soviet Union. The United States is going to have to adapt to that. We're going to have to adapt to a competitor that has size and tremendous capability. But we're seeing diffusion of power, the rise of countries like India, the question of whether or not the European Union will be able to develop as a really effective power center. So that we have to adapt to, but we also have to adapt to an increasingly important set of global challenges that are going to require a different kind of response by the international community. We're in the middle of one of them right now, COVID. Everyone who studied this subject of global health knew a pandemic was coming. It's only one, and there may be others, and this may not even have been the worst that we will experience in our lives. The climate is an incredible challenge as well. So is migration, and so is the evolution of information technology with big data and its influence over media. All of these things will require the United States to act in the world and to develop an image in the world of greater cooperation, because we are not going to be able to solve these problems and protect our own interests by ourselves. So I'd like to put on the table that when we think about rebuilding America's image in this changing world, we're going to have an image that is going to be more cooperative and more multilateral. How that is going to happen and whether we're prepared to step up to it is a really broad question. So thank you.
Mark, thank you very much. It's my pleasure now to introduce, I'll say, a friend close by at Tufts University, Jeff Taliaferro. So Jeff, over to you.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to the two ambassadors. I'd like to just build on some points which Mark made about the United States. I agree that we simply cannot go back to the way we behaved in the world during the first 3 decades of the post-Cold War era, in which the United States, or certain people in the United States, would loudly proclaim that American power was indispensable, that globalization and the import of democracy were the core objectives of foreign policy, and that the United States could act with impunity around the world, even against the advice and the caution of its close allies. The dilemma, though, that the United States and that the Biden administration is facing are many. One of them is that we need to invest to rebuild in the apparatus of foreign policy, in the apparatus of national security. After 4 years of an assault on the national security bureaucracy, followed by 10 years of underinvestment in the Foreign Service, in the intelligence community, and the increasing militarization of our foreign policy. So we need to make the case to the Congress and to the American people that investing in areas such as foreign aid, which is just a pittance of our discretionary budget, is actually a very wise investment for the American people and is inextricably linked to the long-term interests of the United States. We also need to learn to listen to other states. We've talked a good deal so far about the diffusion of power to states such as India and the challenge of a peer great power competitor like China, which is quite dissimilar from the Soviet Union in so many respects. But we need to be cognizant of the concerns of both our allies and of our adversaries, as well as neutral states. And to simply assume that the United States can just assemble broad coalitions of states to contain China in much the same way that we contained the Soviet Union during the Cold War, I think is a recipe for failure and for further alienating many states from the United States. And finally, I think that leaders on both sides of the aisle in Washington, D.C. need to be, quite candid with the American people. There are certain global challenges that, of course, we have to work with others in order to address. Climate change being chief among them, the Arctic being yet another issue, and global health, of course, being the most prominent among them, since we're in the middle of a pandemic. And there are also going to be certain areas, however, in which we're going to have to act unilaterally. But to be upfront with the American people as to what the expected costs and risks of particular ventures are going to be, and not to overpromise and underdeliver, which unfortunately was the pattern in U.S. foreign policy, certainly around the turn of the 21st century, to make grandiose promises about remaking the Middle East and Southeast Asia into zones of liberal democracy, and simply not being able to carry them out for a whole host of reasons. We can't do that anymore. So my overall recommendation is that the United States needs to be realistic. It also needs to be far humbler, and that American leaders need to spend time cultivating the domestic support to make the investments, the institutional investments, so that we can have a more practical and forward-looking engagement with the rest of the world.
Jeff, thank you. I will tell you that a lot of your comments, just like all the comments from Mark and to Lauren, really resonated with me. I want to just make one comment that Lauren made that I saw from my own eyes and ears. Is I spent a little bit of time in Vietnam a few years ago, and the lady that was selling T-shirts in a park spoke perfect English. I mean, perfect English. And she wanted to spend time just talking to an American. My view of what America was in Vietnam was vastly different. And I learned so much about the culture of the country by talking to the lady that was selling T-shirts. Just like I learned a lot about having lunch in Normandy by sitting with some older gentlemen who know what the United States and our allies did in World War II to liberate their country, and the pride they felt for the United States. I want to open up. I'd like a question, and you've all talked about it in kind of different manners, but so there's been a huge change in American foreign policy, I'll say, over the last 4 years. I agree, going back to what Jeff said about the amount of money that we're putting into, I'll say, our foreign policy writ large is really small, and where the Department of Defense gets $700 billion, where a small portion of that would just really improve what the State Department can do for the United States of America. But our image has been tarnished over the last 4 years, and we've kind of stepped back. So if I'm a foreign nation, how do I trust the United States that when we say that we want to re-engage with the world, that we're actually going to re-engage with the world? So Jeff, you're right on my screen. So if I could turn that over to you before I go to our other partners.
Well, that's really the $60 billion question. How can the Biden administration, make credible commitments to other states, given all the media reportage about how divided the United States is, given the reality that we're going to have midterm elections in 2022, and there is a chance, based on historical precedent, that the Democrats could lose control of one or both chambers of Congress. How do you make a credible commitment to other states? I think one of the advantages that the current administration has is that it's filled with seasoned people with lots of policy experience who have cultivated relationships, not only within the Beltway, but also with their opposite numbers in other states. And that, I think, can provide an element of reassurance. But I think it's also important for the administration not to overpromise to other states what the United States can and cannot deliver. I'll give you a tangible example. Let's talk about the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal that the Obama administration negotiated in conjunction with the other permanent members of the Security Council and the European Union and Iran in 2015, and from which the Trump administration withdrew in 2018. The President Joe Biden, has said that he wants to re-enter the JCPOA, and that's admirable, but it runs into, first of all, the opposition of Israel and the opposition of Saudi Arabia to doing that. And the fact that, after 4 years of the so-called maximum pressure campaign by the Trump administration, and the fact that the JCPOA never delivered the economic windfall to Iran that Hassan Rouhani promised that it would, how do you incentivize the Iranians to come back to the bargaining table while at the same time assuring Israel and Saudi Arabia that the United States has their back? I don't have an answer for that, but I'm just using this particular agreement and those particular relationships with allies and adversaries to illustrate some of the dilemmas that the current administration is going to face over the next 2, 3, hopefully 4 years.
No, Jeff, thank you very much. And I think that's something everybody understands that follows this, is you just need to look at the 22 election, and you just need to see who is up for election in 22 in the third of the Senate, and who those senators are. The whole complexion can change in Washington, D.C. Lauren, you have a vast experience. I mean, I was really impressed with your biography, with the amount of times you spent in East, Southeast, and South Asia. And that is really the hot spot in the world right now. So tell me, from that viewpoint, what do you think our key allies and partners in that region expect from the United States? And have they missed anything in the last 4 years that the United States wasn't there for them when they thought we should have been?
Let me go back to some of what Jeff said, who I really liked what you said, Jeff, when you talked about basically we need to listen. I think that's real important. And I think we need to be there. We have to show up. We walked away from things that were important to people in East Asia. It starts with showing up in meetings. We need to show up at the meetings. We have had lots of occasions in the past where we do things in Europe and other parts of the world, and we put our attention there. And East Asia isn't, or Southeast Asia isn't always an emergency. It's not always hot. And so sometimes we don't show up. Something else gets in the way. Just showing up again and listening to what people have to say. Hearing what's important to them is really important. When we are there, then we get a chance to correct their misunderstandings when there are misunderstandings, or frankly, hear what people are telling us that we need to hear and correct our own attitudes and actions. But if we're not there talking to them, we don't hear the truth. So we have to start by showing up and focusing on the truth. In terms of what we've done and what we haven't done, we have, in fact, paid attention to some of what folks are saying. They're worried about China in their neighborhood, and they're worried. And many of them don't want to choose between us and China, but they do want us there focusing on the things that are important to them. That includes, for example, economics. We put together a good agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would have helped to integrate us closely into East Asia, not with East Asians seeing us only from a security post-World War II alliance perspective, but on things that matter to them, their economic future, their livelihoods going forward. We need to look at re-engaging on that. That would make a big difference. And the third area, I think, is when you talked about, Mark, some of the age, well, everyone has talked a little bit about how the world is changing. One of the places it's changing most rapidly is in East Asia. As you mentioned, I'm on the board of the Asia Foundation, which has done governance and development work in Asia for more than 60 years. And we look at a world where we see many of the partners we've been working with in Asia very soon to become advanced middle income countries, or certainly middle income countries. They have things that they can teach us. I started with a story of Bangladesh. A third of Bangladesh goes underwater every year in the monsoon season, and they get through it. They have some things they can teach us about managing in that kind of a crisis that we could have used in New Orleans. So humbly listening to what some folks around the world have to tell us would, I think, also make a difference. So those are 3 areas I would start with, I think, when we talk about where can we begin in East Asia, Southeast Asia, and South Asia.
Yeah, you've highlighted something that Americans kind of have a really tough time doing, which is listening, as well as treating our partners around the world as equal partners and not simply as, I'll say, supplicants of the United States to do what the United States wants to do in the world. Mark, any comments on this? And then I want to go to a comment that President Biden made when he got elected, that I would think Russia and China will have a problem with. So Mark?
So Jack, I really want to jump right on what Lauren had to say. I've always advocated everywhere I've gone in the world and over decades for all of our missions to practice what I like to call Aretha Franklin diplomacy, RESPECT. This cannot be overstated. People all want to be treated with dignity, and our lack of willingness to do so undermines our image everywhere we go. I was very struck that in a place where we have a long-standing set of relationships and our strongest international alliance in Europe, early on in the last administration, Angela Merkel found herself reacting after some speeches by the former administration, saying, I think you all have read this, we Europeans must really take our fate into our own hands. Why do I raise that? Because if you destroy, it takes decades to build trust, but you can destroy it very quickly. Whatever it is the United States does now in terms of how it is perceived in the world, it's going to have to invest in a way that will make people trust in us in the future. And that's not going to be easy. I think, Jack, that you've talked about how people around the world are watching American politics. They always have. They know it well. Frequently, they know it better than our own people do. And they know that the last election was a close one, that debates over America's role in the world remain very intense, and that it's hard to tell exactly what's going to happen. I watch with great interest the executive board. That's really sleep time TV for most people, but watch the executive board of the World Health Organization meet recently. And the United States met just as we were going through our transition on January 20th. So we had a representative of the Trump administration in the morning, and in the afternoon, a representative of the Biden administration. And we chose, this administration chose for the representative to be Anthony Fauci, not a diplomat, not a political leader, really a technical expert. And I think it was trying to send that kind of message. We want to be respectful. We are an organization that deals with health and science. We want to work on the basis of science. But we have to show, and Lauren made this point right at the beginning, people are watching us. We not only have to say the right things and do the right things, but we have to demonstrate competence in what we do. And that includes the way we deal with things in the United States. Samantha Power wrote an article just a little while ago calling the United States and the new administration a can-do power. Others around the world are going to be looking and seeing, well, can the United States deal with COVID or can't it? Can the United States rebuild its own infrastructure or can't it? Can the United States run an election or can't it? So, the much maligned word, and deservedly so, of American exceptionalism, we certainly ought not to be trotting that around. It's a disrespectful concept in many respects. But while we don't want to trot that concept around, we have to work to be exceptional in what we do. We can't be lazy about what we do. We have to demonstrate that we are capable of achieving things. And that also is going to take time.
So Mark, how do you work? When President Biden got elected, he said that the United States is back at the head of the table, wanted to prove that we're kind of re-engaging with the world. Saying the President of the United States is at the head of the table means that China and Russia are not. So how do you develop this relationship of not being friends? I won't go that far, but at least that you can work together with these nations. And I agree with the comments of made before. China is not, and I think, Jeff, you talked about this, China is not the Soviet Union at all. But China is very innovative. They have a large economy. They're very good at what they do. People in this country will have no problem owning a Chinese product because it's capable. I don't see Americans having a Russian cell phone or a Russian computer. So based on the relationship of the United States, how do we work with these other big powers in the world, specifically China, and then I'll go over to Russia.
So I've always felt, as I said earlier, that the United States has brought together both power and principle. And that really means being both realists and idealists at the same time. Frankly, I think we should just continue with that in our relations with great powers like China and Russia. We cannot adopt the attitude that the United States is somehow so pristine that we can't deal with other countries just because their behavior is terrible. That's wrong. We were allied with Stalin's Soviet Union. President Nixon opened up a door to China, which changed the world. We're going to have to deal with people as they are. That's a respectful way of dealing with people, but we're also going to have to be idealistic about the principles that we pursue. And we are already seeing that. There have been reports about the first conversation between President Biden and President Xi Jinping. And it seems clear that President Biden tried to emphasize areas of common interest, but also said we still care about human rights. This is not something we're just going to put aside. And we won't startle people by saying those things. We just have to do it in a respectful way.
If I could just jump in for a moment and add something to what Mark just said, and I agree that idealism and realism, they have a dialectic relationship. And when one tries to deal with the world not as it is, but as one wants it exclusively, that's a recipe for disaster. But it's also a recipe for disaster if one conflates realism, which is dealing with the world as it is, and being cognizant of others' interests and the distribution of power. If one conflates realism or realpolitik with intransigence and belligerence. And unfortunately, the previous administration went down that road in its dealings with China, among other states, in particular the so-called trade war and the assertion that, well, trade wars are easy to win. Well, no, they're not. And they are lose-lose propositions for all of the parties. But, being realistic as to where you can agree, where you can disagree, and how you manage those areas of disagreement with China as well as with other states, I think is critical for the United States. And it's not just in terms of U.S.-China relations, but also in terms of our relations with Russia and in terms of our relations with our allies, as well as neutrals, as well as other states with whom we have difficult relations.
I'd like to, if I can, just jump on the bandwagon here, agreeing with Mark on the importance of being cognizant of our power and remaining true to our principles. And with what Jeffrey was saying, that you can work with people. You have to know very clearly where you agree, where you disagree, and manage the rest. I just want to really emphasize those. As some of you may know who've read my biography, I'm an old trade negotiator. I helped to negotiate Taiwan and the PRC entries into the World Trade Organization. I also lived in China during some of the more difficult periods right after Tiananmen, during the time when we mistakenly bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, and the Hainan P3 incident, when Chinese forced our plane to the ground and held our pilots captive, perhaps not realizing that we've gone to war for that, say in the War of 1812 and the Pueblo incident, that those things matter to the United States. Why do I raise this? I want to add one more nuance here. We have to be very clear about what it is that we want and what it is that we need. And then don't capitulate preemptorily, especially when we're negotiating with China. Basically, the way China likes to negotiate is, what do you want? They get us to tell them, they negotiate, they get us to negotiate with ourselves, we change our position, they put it in their pocket, well, do you have something more? And that's the new starting point. We need to be very clear about what our interests are, where we do agree, where we have room for negotiating, and where we need to remain true to our own interests and our own principles. Secondly, we need to, again, I think, Jeffrey, you suggested this too, we need to be clear about what other players there are and what their interests are and what they bring to the table. One of the things I used to do when I was a US ambassador for the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation multilateral forum with about 21 Asia Pacific countries. So I would meet each time with all of the other senior officials, so a number of times every year. But I always let them start the conversation by telling me what they hoped to gain out of our coming meetings or our work over the coming year. And then looking for the places where, in fact, we did have a common interest. We could work together. We could create some place where we could move forward together. I think that that's important, again, Jeffrey, as you were saying, both with our allies, with people with whom we have differences, but we need to work with them, like China. And there are ways forward if we approach it in those ways, but neither coming in with our agenda, we're leading and you go our way, or we don't go at all, or capitulating preemptorily will not serve us well.
So both there, all three of you had made the comment about working together on common interests. So what are those specific common interests that we could work with China or Russia that are common between us, that we could actually have a meaningful dialogue among the countries? So Mark, over to you. What are those common interests that we could work together with other nations? Unmute, please.
You just mentioned 3 countries, all of which are nuclear powers. I know you know a few things about nuclear weapons, Jack, over the years, having led some of those forces. We have a common interest being on the same planet and our survival. People look at the Cold War and see so many bad things about it, but in fact, the United States and the Soviet Union cooperated to manage a global conflict with heavy armaments on both sides without ever really pulling the trigger. It actually was a terrific success story, and it was a success story not of one country over another country, but actually of a kind of cooperative relationship. I do not want to suggest equivalence between the United States and the Soviet Union at all. But I raise that to say we were able to work with a sworn enemy, the Soviet Union, with nuclear arms in multitude and find common ground. We saw that we were able to work with China on climate change issues. Now, obviously, we have a lot more work to do. The Paris Agreement needs to be improved, and we have to go in other directions. But we have common interests in maintaining a planet that's going to be inhabitable. But I would also say that we have very common interests in maintaining a world that has the opportunity for prosperity for all of its members. What does that mean? It turns out the United States relationship with China, for instance, and and Russia to a lesser extent, is based on trade relationships that are very dense and that go in both directions. We need to manage those relationships in ways that benefit all of our societies. And we're capable of doing that under the right circumstances. So we don't have, I would say, a common set of interests related to some of the elements of the third piece of the big triangle of security, prosperity, and freedom. We certainly see freedom in very different ways. But actually, I think that we can find ways to talk together, to find common ground in those areas that will end up benefiting all of our citizens. So I wouldn't give up on that either.
So Mark, you brought up the word that I like to talk about all the time, which is nuclear. I think as we're working together with other nations, I've done a lot of nuclear in my life. I almost think the terms we're using now are Cold War terms that really need to get changed. And the term I want to bring up is arms control. You know, if you're going to sit down with the Chinese, arms control, if I'm someone from China is going to be, I'll talk to you once I have 1,550 weapons at the new start limit. Probably what we need to work on is, one, changing the name of what we're trying to do when it comes to nuclear weapons. And number two is, why don't we focus on what's important now, which in my opinion is transparency. There's a lot of value for the Russians to come to the United States. Look at our forces. We go to Russia, we see their forces. If the next agreement, and we could get China just to have a Chinese leadership to come to one of our nuclear bases, and we go to one of their nuclear bases, talking about the size of the arsenal, I think we can go forward in a lot of different ways. I want to move in a completely different direction. We got a question, and Jeff, you brought this up at the beginning about we need to be candid with the American people, and I believe those were the words you used. So we got a question that says, how do we rebuild America's international image in a changing world, but how does President Biden start to rebuild America's image to Americans?
I think he's already started to do that. I think that, well, first of all, we have a president who is not prone to let his inner thoughts free on Twitter. So we've regularized communications, but also, a president who is willing to speak to the American people about the challenges that the country is facing and the difficulty of dealing with various international issues, whether it's climate change or the pandemic. And I know that we wanted to transition, and I wanted to make this point in the previous segment, but one area in which the United States, Russia, and China could cooperate for their mutual benefit, as well as the benefit of humanity, would be in the distribution of COVID vaccines. I'm surprised that we haven't talked about that, because that, in a sense, is both a pressing issue, but it's also low-hanging fruit. China already is shipping vaccines to various countries. Russia has a vaccine which it's distributing. The United States, we have our own problems with vaccine rollout, but I think it's critically important that the United States become involved with the COVAX effort as a way of trying to rebuild our image.
Thank you. Lauren?
I want to go back to one of the things I said at the beginning, that words and actions matter. And I think that's true both domestically and overseas. It's not only not firing off quickly, but sometimes when you think about how to phrase things, you can diffuse tensions, you can avoid over-promising and then disappointing. And that raises, again, the point that we do need to have people who have background and have experience in doing that. So yes, we do need people who are fired up and really do want to address problems that need addressing and are bringing in enthusiasm and ideas to get going on things like climate change, or any number of other issues you can think of. But we also have to have room both domestically and internationally for the nuance that finds ways to express things that give people an opportunity to buy in, for taking the time to let people find their place in the vision. And I think that's as true domestically as it is internationally on some of the difficult problems that have a global complexion to them.
Yeah, one of the items, Lauren, that you brought up, which I completely agree with, is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and that was going to be a huge benefit. From a military perspective, it's a really nice counteraction to China. And I thought it was, and it got mired in politics in this country and really got a bad rap when, if you look at what China was able to do with their economic policies, when we said no to Trans-Pacific Partnership, it was a huge loss to the United States. And it's those items that we really need to help educate the American public on what it really means for the United States and what it means for them. So people understand in Iowa why it's important, because we can all get into the price of soybeans and what's happening based on a lack of agreement with China that people stand up to. Hey,
also, let me just add one thought there. Also, like when we're talking about being able to express things domestically and overseas, I can remember APEC didn't really deal with security issues per se, but we were able to talk about things related to security issues when we expressed them in economic terms. And that just made it easier for everyone to deal with it because, well, we all agreed that we needed to be more prosperous and we needed to work together to do that. So again, sometimes being willing to maintain our principles, but not say them necessarily in the ways that make it hard for other people to buy in. It's a very careful balance, both domestically and internationally, to be able to do that.
thank you. Mark?
Yeah, could I say one of the things that I'm really worried about when I look at what's going on is not just about the American image, but about the images of other great powers in other parts of the world that are based on narratives of grievance. We see in China constant references to the century of national humiliation. And the Russians clearly feel the same kind of sense of grievance. They were somehow cheated out of an empire that belonged to them. The United States also can fall easily into a self-reinforcing narrative of grievance, that we have not gotten the fair deal we should have gotten from the rest of the world, that our allies have not lived up to their commitments, that people are treating us poorly in different ways. I think, and this gets back to what Jeff was saying about our leaders speaking candidly to the American people, we need to find ways to talk to the American people about our own role in the world that will be positive, that won't rely on grievance as the basis for forming our position in the world. That's not so easy. And then we've got to try to convince others, whether it's Russia or China or India or Nigeria or South Africa, that we have common things we can work on that can go past those past grievances. That can create a positive cycle, but it's a lot of work to do. And it has to do with images of what we say to ourselves and what we say to others.
Thank you. Hey, I want to appoint everybody. So I'll use a military term. I'm going to promote you all, and congratulations. You will be a Secretary of State, maybe in the last 2 years of the Biden administration. So congratulations to all of you for that. And you look at the problems and the challenges, and I'll call them challenges and opportunities that exist in the world, whether it comes to Iran and a nuclear capability, when it comes to what North Korea is doing. We really haven't talked at all about North Korea. We've done a lot of talk today about Russia and China. We really haven't talked about the Arctic. There's a lot of cyber issues. We just had SolarWinds attack with the United States, and we can go and talk for a long time on misinformation campaigns. So from an international relations perspective, looking at the world, what do you think of the top 3 items that if you were in the Biden administration, we really need to focus on? So I'm going to turn now to Jeff to talk about that, and then we'll kind of move on. So what are the top 3 issues with everything going in the world right now? What are those top 3 issues? And you mentioned COVID already, which is something we didn't talk about. And obviously that is a big deal. I would really love to see my grandson again, which is tough in this environment. So Jeff, over to you.
Well, I think, yes, global health, climate, and whatever term we're going to use to supplant strategic arms control. are the three top issues that I would identify. And if I were nominated and confirmed as Secretary of State, those would be the things that I would be trying to pursue. They're all very difficult issues, and they're all the types of issues that no one administration can tackle, because the longest tenure any administration is going to have is 8 years. However, we've had such a disruptive period, especially over the past now year, because of the pandemic. I think that crises provide windows of opportunity to do big and important things because they disrupt people's lives. They create misery. They create tremendous uncertainty. And it's in that type of environment in which creative leadership can mobilize forces and try to get big things done. Recognizing that, yes, there are always going to have to be adjustments along the way. And the solutions that you come up with at time X may not be, perfect solutions, 20 years in the future. But we do have this window of opportunity. So if I were Secretary of State during the last 2 years of a Biden administration, I would be pursuing, agreements about global climate change, strategic arms control, or whatever term we're going to use to replace that, and strategic arms control, and I'm trying to remember the third one. I'm sorry.
Global health.
Global health.
Yeah.
Because we know that there will be another pandemic.
No, completely agree. Lauren, your thoughts?
I would focus on opportunity. When we talk about national security, most of the time we talk about threats. I remember having a conversation with some military colleagues, and they were talking about which threat condition we were in, and nobody pays attention to the pre-threat conditions. I go, whoops, that's kind of what we're doing in the State Department and what a number of others do. But I would focus on opportunities. We are indeed at I think, an amazingly fascinating time where we can look together at things like the future of work. That's really looking different now with all that we're learning during the COVID period, with the explosion of opportunities through the new information revolutions that's going on. So instead of focusing on things like cybersecurity per se, which is a threat, indeed, we must be cognizant of it, and it's huge. It is huge. But can we instead flip that around and focus on opportunity? If we do that, I think the United States in particular is well placed to regain our own self-confidence and also to be able to work collaboratively with many other partners around the world. I mean, most of the patents in the world come here. Most of the innovations, the innovators want to work here, and there's a reason for that. So there's a vibrancy that can come by focusing on opportunity. I'd also focus on opportunity in the sense that I would spend more attention on Asia. There's a lot happening there. The US military has already committed that it's going to be spending about 50% of its effort in the Asia Pacific region. And yes, that is in part because of China. But the other way to look at that is those are rapidly changing economies that are able now to, many of them, stand on their own, which can be new partners. And so let's focus on the opportunities there to work together to address some of the big challenges ahead. And then finally, I would say, let's focus on looking at what matters and what we can do. So there are many issues. You ticked off some of them that we could maybe do, but let's pick a few that matter. Pay attention to the others, don't ignore them, but let's pick a few that do matter where we actually can maybe do something and focus on those. That's a political decision, but I would say focus on what we can do.
Thank you very much. Mark? This is your job
What-
interview, by the way, Mark.
What an amazingly American panel we have. I just listened to what Jeff and Lauren had to say, and there is no doubt that despite all the challenges we face, that Americans want to focus on the positive things, that we want to be optimistic, that we want to look at opportunities, and we want to look at, as Jeff said, finding ways to get big things done. So I think that any American leadership over the next 4 years, and certainly beyond that, will have to focus on all the relationships, have to focus on the big strategic interests that we have. But in terms of the way people look at an administration and what can be achieved in an administration, it's a certain amount of time and you need to have achievable goals. There are some. On the health front, the United States can lead the effort to finally eradicate polio. We helped eradicate smallpox. We can do it with polio. We're almost there. It's not an impossible thing to do. And I think closely allied with that would be coming to grips with COVID in a way, and this has already been raised by Jeff, in a way in which we can show the world that the United States supports equity for everyone in the world in terms of access to vaccine and health. That's one big thing we can do. I'm very interested in migration and refugee issues, and certainly, we're going to be taking some very different steps on refugees. But one of the things that really strikes me is there are always more refugees. We're not finding durable solutions for refugees. People flee Syria, they get stuck in Lebanon or Jordan. People flee from Myanmar, they get stuck in Bangladesh. It would be great if the United States could work with others to find durable solutions that will find a real future for some of these refugees instead of being stuck, warehoused wherever they are. And finally, I think no matter what we do, we have to tackle climate because climate is going to exacerbate all of our other problems. And the United States, I think, not only can help be a leader in all of the efforts to reach broader agreements, I still think that we can lead on technology. We can find ways technologically to support solutions that we haven't even thought of yet. So I'd like to see the United States, as Jeff said, get some big things done with the world. And those are 3 areas where we can do it.
Yeah, you brought up, everyone has brought up some really fascinating items. And what's really fascinating is looking at the problems through the eyes of other nations. What did they value where if we help them, not only is there goodwill, but there's a benefit to the United States. I love the way, Lauren, you talked about the opportunity piece as looking at the issues, whether it's an opportunity in Asia or basically turning cybersecurity and not looking at the negative parts of that, but where can we actually work together? We only have a couple of minutes left. I want to really go around the horn and any final comments that anyone may have on items that we didn't cover, which is we covered a lot, but there's also a lot of items we didn't cover. So I'm going to do it in reverse from the way we did the introduction. So Jeff, over to you, sir.
There are so many items that we didn't cover. We didn't, for example, talk about the Arctic. We didn't talk about space, which I think is an increasingly important area given the reliance of the United States and Russia, China, India, and many, many other states on space-based assets for communication, for intelligence gathering. We didn't really talk about our energy future. Independent of global climate change. I mean, these are areas of opportunity, and we barely touched on cyber. You talked briefly, Jack, about the SolarWinds hack. Well, that is going to happen. That was, as far as we know, as far as in publicly available information, that was an espionage effort. And for 20 years, we've been trying to come to some type of modus vivendi with Russia and or China on what can or what ought or ought not to be fair game for these types of espionage. But nonetheless, we have to keep trying. So again, those are all areas in which there are opportunities. Certainly there are threats, but there are also opportunities for international cooperation and to brandish the United States image as a responsible stakeholder.
Thank you very much. And Mark, as we're running out of time.
I think the United States has to put particular emphasis on how we communicate with the world. By that, I mean, we have to spend a lot of attention on what has been called public diplomacy, but all the other elements of soft power, including, for instance, our universities, and making sure that they're open to the world, because that's how the world learns about us, and that's how we build allies. I know we're short on time, so I'll stop there.
No, thank you very much. And Lauren?
When we used to talk about international relations, we meant relations between countries. But the one way in which the world has changed greatly is that now governments play a proportionately smaller role in creating the image of the United States. That role is played by many, many actors, including forums like this one, students who have interchanges, Peace Corps volunteers going places, companies working in different places. So I think that the thought I would want to leave going forward is that each of us, in whatever role we're playing, whether as Secretary of State or in a university or wherever, needs to be cognizant about how our words, how we portray the United States, what we say and what we do affects the image of the United States.
Thank you very much. I want to thank our three distinguished panel members. It was a pleasure. And I learned a lot like I do at all these events. And it would be great if we could make this a course because I would like to have each of you as my professor. I want to thank our audience for participating today and for the questions. And on behalf of the Pardee School of Global Studies, thank you for attending this latest edition of Beyond the Headlines. Thank you.
Thank you.